Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good almost afternoon. The Income and Affordability Study is researched and presented each year in accordance with Section 26-510B of the Rent Stabilization Law, which requires the Rent Guidelines Board to consider relevant data from the current and projected cost of living indices and permits consideration of other measures of housing affordability in its deliberations. To assist the board in meeting this obligation, RGB research staff produce an annual income and affordability study, which reports on housing affordability and tenant income in New York City's rental market. The study highlights year-to-year changes in many of the major economic factors affecting New York City's tenant population and takes into consideration a broad range of market forces, rent levels, and public policies affecting housing affordability. Such factors include New York City's overall economic condition, including unemployment rates, inflation rates, as well as housing and income costs, the impact of federal housing policies, and other relevant factors such as the number of eviction proceedings and homelessness levels. In summary, 2018 saw New York City with growth in gross city product, which in inflation-adjusted or real terms increased 3.0% during calendar year 2018, the 9th consecutive year of increase. The city also gained 86,600 jobs, and inflation rose at a slightly lower rate than the previous year, with prices rising 1.9% on average during 2018 in the metro area. And inflation-adjusted wages increased by 3.5% in real terms over the prior 12 months. The unemployment rate fell to 4.1%. Evictions also fell by 13.9% during 2018. Homeless staying in city shelters increased, rising by 0.9%, while the number of cash assistance recipients decreased by 2.8%. And the number of food stamp recipients, now known as SNAP, fell for the 5th consecutive year, decreasing by 3.6%. New York City's gross city product, which measures the total value of goods and services produced, increased by an inflation-adjusted 3.0% between 2017 and 2018, following a 2.6% increase in the prior year. On a quarterly basis, there was positive growth in all but 2 quarters since the beginning of 2009. In 2018, the greatest growth was during the 4th quarter, an increase of 3.9%. The United States economy saw gross domestic product increase as well, but at a slower rate than New York City, increasing by 2.9% in 2018, and showing positive growth on a quarterly basis in all but 3 quarters since the 2nd quarter of 2009, including a 4.2% rise during the 2nd quarter of 2018. The rate of inflation, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, which measures the change in the cost of typical household goods, rose at a slightly slower pace during 2018, increasing at a slower rate, 1.9%, than the previous year. This rate increase follows increases over the past 3 years of 2.0%, 1.1%, and 0.1%. For comparison, the U.S. CPI for urban consumers increased 2.4% in 2018, 0.3 percentage points higher than the previous year. New York City's unemployment rate fell 0.5 percentage points during 2018 to 4.1%, the lowest level since at least 1976. Queens had this year's lowest borough unemployment rate, 3.6%, a decline of 0.4 percentage points, while it was 3.7% in Manhattan, a decline of 0.4 percentage points, 4.2% in Staten Island, a decline of 0.6 percentage points, 4.6% in Brooklyn, a decline of 0.5 percentage points, and the Bronx once again had the highest borough unemployment rate, 5.7%, and fell 0.6 percentage points from 2017. The most recently available data for New York City shows unemployment rates of 4.9% in January and 4.6% in February of 2019. The U.S. rate also fell in 2018, down to 3.9%, a 0.5 percentage point decrease. As this graph illustrates, 2018 saw falling unemployment rates for both New York City and the nation as a whole. The New York City rate is in blue, and the U.S. jobless rate is in orange. The rate in New York City is now at its lowest level since at least 1976, the first year for which data is available. Coinciding with falling unemployment rates, employment levels in New York City grew for the 9th consecutive year. Overall, among both city residents as well as those commuting into the city, New York City gained 86,600 jobs in 2018, a 1.9% increase from 2017. There were gains in all but two sectors, including the educational and health services sector, up 4.6%, adding 44,300 jobs. The construction sector, up 3.5%, adding 5,300 jobs, and the professional and business services sector, which rose 2.6%, adding 19,300 jobs. All other sectors which rose increased from between 0.6% and 1.9%. However, the manufacturing sector did decline, down 3.6% or 2,600 jobs, as well as a very slight decrease in the trade, transport, and utilities sector, which fell 0.05% or 300 jobs. The most recently available numbers from January and February of 2019 show a 2.1% increase in January and 1.7% in February in total employment as compared to the same months of the previous year. As this graph shows, New York City gained 86,600 jobs in 2018, the 9th consecutive year of increase. We also look at wage data, though the analysis is limited by the fact that there is a significant lag time in reporting of quarterly census of employment and wages data, the main source of income data. The most recent annual numbers via the quarterly census of employment and wages, which covers the 2017 calendar year, reveal a 2.5% increase in real wages, that is, wages that have been adjusted for inflation, for those employed in New York City, and a 4.5% increase in nominal wages during 2017. The data is based on quarterly tax filings by businesses in New York State and captures approximately 97% of all non-farm employment. During the most recent 12-month period, the fourth quarter of 2017 through the third quarter of 2018, real wages rose by 3.5% and nominal wages by 5.4%. Note that this data is preliminary. In the finance and insurance sector, which accounts for more than a quarter of all wages in New York City, wages rose by a real 4.4%. In the administrative, waste, educational, and health services sector, which account for 16% of wages, wages rose by a real 2.2%. In the professional and technical services sector, which accounts for 13% of all wages, real wages rose by 2.1%. And in the government sector, which accounts for 11% of all wages, wages rose by a real 10.9%. And looking at real wage growth by quarter in 2018, real wages were up 1.6% in the first quarter, up 3.5% in the second quarter, and up 3.0% in the third quarter as compared with the same quarters of the prior year. Fourth quarter data is not yet available. To provide a source of more recent wage data, we also utilize the Current Employment Statistics Survey conducted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This survey is much more current than the quarterly census, but cannot be broken out by industry, is a much smaller sample size, and does not include monetary compensation such as bonuses. Per this survey, weekly wages in New York City during 2018 rose 3.1% in nominal terms and 1.2% in real terms.
Danielle, can I just ask, how come government wages went up so dramatically? That just seems kind of weird. We don't know, but it's...
Yeah, I don't personally know how that happened. We looked a little closer at the data because Andrew had brought up that point while we were going over it. I thought maybe it was because some contracts had been settled, but we think actually it was more that there was a fairly large increase in employment levels. So potentially the extra people that were hired are being paid more, but possibly also some contract issues that were settled.
Thank you.
As this graph shows, both nominal and inflation-adjusted wages rose in the most recent 12-month period. Real wages are shown in 2018 dollars and reflect wages from the first 3 quarters of the year shown, plus the 4th quarter of the prior year.
What makes the difference of the nominal wages and the real wages?
So nominal wages are just literally what people are paid in each year. So if you make $50,000 last year and you make $55,000 this year, that's that increase. Real wages take inflation into account. So if your wages went up 2%, you got a 2% raise, but inflation went up 2%, then real wages are flat. So you're basically going back in each year, you're making the wages into 2018 numbers, which means, so say from 2017 to 2018, that's 2%, but 2016 to 2018 might be 3.5%. And as you go back further, you're adjusting it higher and higher and higher. So if you want to see the effect, and this goes for anything where I report real or inflation adjusted numbers, this is basically just looking at the effect of inflation to see if people are doing better or worse after inflation. Sure. Per the 2017 American Community Survey, the most recently available data, the New York City poverty rate for all individuals is 18.0%. By borough, it is 11.8% in Staten Island, 12.1% in Queens, 16.2% in Manhattan, 19.8% in Brooklyn, and 28.0% in the Bronx. Rates in each borough decreased as compared to the prior year by as much as 1.4 percentage points. Looking at rates in New York City by age, for those under the age of 18, the poverty rate in New York City is 25.2%. For those aged 18 to 64, the poverty rate is 15.6%. And for those aged 65 and older, the poverty rate is 18.0%. Rates fell for each of these categories as compared to 2016. For comparison, the poverty rate for all individuals in the U.S. is 13.4%. Looking more closely at
Just
families.
curious, did the rates go down even by boroughs too?
Yes, everything went down.
Every borough went down?
Yes, every single
What was
number.
the Bronx before? What was the Bronx last year? Was it over 30? I mean, it's so high.
I think it was,
And now it's 20. On page 26, appendix 8, it's a historical view of poverty rates going back to 2007. Thank you.
sure. For all families, the poverty rate is 14.7%. For those families in renter-occupied housing, the poverty rate is 21.3%. While for those in owner-occupied housing, the poverty rate is 4.2%. For families with related children under the age of 18, the poverty rate is 21.2%. For married coupled families, it is 8.9%. For female-headed families, the poverty rate is 27.3%. And for male-headed families, the poverty rate is 12.8%. All rates fell as compared to the prior year. Two- 2017 HVS data was released in February of 2018. This triennial survey of the housing and demographic characteristics of the city's residents found that the citywide vacancy rate was 3.63% in 2017, well below the 5% threshold required for rent regulation to continue under state law. The Bronx had the lowest vacancy rate in the city at 2.71%, translating into the availability of just 10,558 rentals in a borough with 389,310 rental apartments. Manhattan, by contrast, had the highest vacancy rate in 2017 at 4.73%. Of the remaining boroughs, Queens's rate stood at 3.50% and Brooklyn at 3.28%. and the sample size in Staten Island was too low to calculate an accurate vacancy rate. Examining the affordability of rental housing, the 2017 HVS reported that the median gross rent-to-income ratio was 33.7%, meaning that half of all households residing in rental housing pay more than 33.7% of their income in gross rent and half pay less. This is just slightly less than the ratio in both 2011 and 2014, when it was 33.8%. Rent-controlled tenants saw a median gross rent-to-income ratio of 43.1%, an increase from 35.5% in 2014. The median gross rent-to-income ratio of stabilized households is 36.0%, including ratios of 36.8% in pre-war units and 34.4% in post-war units, decreases of 0.4 percentage points for rent-stabilized tenants as a whole, 0.2 percentage points for pre-war tenants, and 0.3 percentage points for tenants in post-war units. An analysis of data by the RGB found that the rent-to-income ratio reported in the HVS is artificially high due to the way that the ratio for those tenants on Section 8 are reported. The RGB estimates that the median gross rent-to-income ratio for rent-stabilized tenants who do not receive Section 8 is 33.5%, and the out-of-pocket rent-to-income ratio for all rent-stabilized tenants, including those on Section 8, is 31.5%. The ratio is 31.4% for those in non-regulated rentals, a decrease of 1.6 percentage points from 2014, and 33.8% for those in other regulated rentals, an increase of 3.5 percentage points. And nearly one-third of rental households pay more than 50% of their household income in gross rent, 1.1 percentage points less than 2014.
Danielle, could we just talk about this? I just want to make sure I understand it. So once you adjust for Section 8, then the stabilized population looks almost exactly the same as the entire population. Is that right? Am I getting that?
Yes, because what's happening is that when they're going to tenants who have Section 8 vouchers, they're asking them what the rent is on the apartment. That's called the contract rent. They're asking them what their income is. They're also asking them what their out-of-pocket rent is. But the rent-to-income ratio that's reported is just the contract or the gross rent, which includes utilities, over your income. So if your income is $12,000 a year and the rent that the landlord is getting is $1,000 a month, that's 100% rent-to-income ratio. But in reality, they're paying 30%, little less, little more. And that's why the out-of-pocket ratio, which includes Section 8 tenants, is also telling, because that's literally what's coming out of your pocket for rent plus utilities as a proportion of your household income.
So just because I'm not sure if I understand it, out-of-pocket refers to the amount that a stabilized tenant who either does or does not receive Section 8 pays from their income towards their rent.
Yes. Whereas the overall rent-to-income ratio is the rent that the owner is receiving, whether it be from the tenant or from a government subsidy like Section 8.
So the 36%, after stabilized 36%, it's as if we ascribe the government subsidy to the household. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I would say so. It's really only an issue mostly with Section 8 tenants because they're the ones who are paying less each month.
Does it apply to the screening group tenant too? If they would have a rent and the city would pay the increased amount? So there's a few more people.
Yes, it would, if they knew the difference between what the rent on the apartment was and what they were actually paying out of their pocket. That would apply. We found in the past, I'm not sure about the 2017 HVS, but because I haven't looked at it closely enough, but in the 2014 HVS, the number of SCREE recipients was way undercounted. So I'm not sure quite how accurate it is, but we can take a look at that if you want that number. But the out-of-pocket one would take that into account.
And screen tree is what percentage of the population, or of the relevant population?
I'd have to look up the most recent numbers. I think it might be like 60,000?
Yeah, I was going to say 45,000.
I think that's what the HV, now I'm getting confused.
Because then there's the actual number that,
Yeah, we can get the actual number.
But that's a relatively small percentage of the housing. I mean, it's not insignificant, but
it's not insignificant, but yeah, it's,
It's small, where it just factors into our discussion, it's just that someone who, it is a means-tested program, so, you know, and many of those people are in rent-stabilized stock, so any increase that we put forward, the city pays that increase. The owner still is able to raise the rent on the apartment and collect that income in order to maintain the building, but the increase isn't passed on to the resident.
And just to be clear, and I'm asking as opposed to saying, but SCREE, anybody who's over 62 who hits an income threshold is eligible. And then for DRE, the eligibility, I guess, is based on some government determination of disability, is that right?
Plus, yeah, plus the income
income,
threshold. I should say also, though, that SCREE freezes your rent at the legal rent. So you can be technically eligible for SCREE and your rent is getting frozen at the legal rent. But if you're paying a preferential rent, your rent can keep going up until it reaches the legal rent, or the legal rent at the point that it was frozen.
And then the legal rent, our increases will stay past that tenant. And so I think that's an important distinction that I also continue to make, because I think it's an important around stability of the housing stock. If it's 60,000 units, that means after all of those tenants, if the program continues, in theory, they would continue to, 45,000 of them will continue to get the program. So maybe there's a fluctuation in and out, but that will remain the legal rents for any tenant that moves after.
Not the frozen rent, but
Right,
the
the
regular
legal
legal
rent.
rent, yeah, got it.
Yeah, and so some tenants do, like the minimum is 30%, you have to pay 30% of their income, but some tenants apply and are paying 60% of their income, 80% of their income, and they're locked in at that 80%. It doesn't go down unless they get a preferential rent. But the legal rent still remains the same, and it still increases based on our adjustments and MCIs and any other additional increases.
For the out-of-pocket rent-to-income ratio, do we have the range?
Can you define what you mean by range?
So, like similar with a question that we had on like NOI earlier, it's 31.5% is the average.
That's the median.
It's the median.
Yeah, so that's the 50th percentile.
Okay.
If you want it by other deciles, I can run that.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be helpful.
So you want just out of pocket by decile?
Just a question about that last bullet point, the 32% of rental households that pay more than 50% of their income in rent, that is only rent stabilized units without Section 8 or with Section 8?
I would have to check. I wrote rental households, which would imply that it's all tenants. I would have to double check if I meant rent stabilized tenants. If I did mean rent stabilized tenants, it's all rent stabilized tenants, but I wrote rental, so hopefully I meant all rental. But if you want the number for rent stabilized, with or without Section 8, I can do that.
Danielle, do we have any, I mean, they may be in the report, I just forget, any national comparison data as to the rent burden?
Well, we're going to get into the American Community Survey.
Okay.
Which, the American Community Survey is for all rental households. So when we give New York City data, it's for all rental households because there's no other way to stratify it. But you can theoretically compare other cities to the HVS data. It's not the same survey, but I can get any cities that you wanted from ACS data.
I guess it would just be, at least for me, it would be interesting to compare what the rent burden is, as you say, maybe for other cities and maybe just a national average, you know, so other major large population cities and a national average just as a means of comparison.
Sure. I don't think at the rate that,
Numbers wise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
numbers-wise, yeah.
But obviously, with many kind of cities that have some variation on the
I mean, I will put in San Francisco and Boston and,
LA doesn't work out
yeah. I'll try to include any cities that have some form of rent control.
Do we have information on, like, if there's a significant amount of double occupancy in rent stabilized or general housing stock?
You mean the number of people per apartment?
Yes, like doubling up. I'm not sure exactly what the best metric is, right? Because I don't know if it's by bedroom size or if it's just number of people
Yeah,
in the
we
unit. Or...
we have another report that we're going to present in May that will present the rates of crowding and
Right.
if you want it, the definition of overcrowded is, I think, more than one person per room, and severely overcrowded is more than 1.5 persons per room.
Okay.
So we will get into that. If you want it sooner, I can give you that data sooner, or it's in, I think Andrew gave you a book of
Yep.
last year's reports. These numbers were all presented last year. There's no change to them.
Got
If
it.
you wanted it by some other metric, then just let me know what metrics you want to put in.
Okay, I'll look at last year's first, just as a comparison, because I think it helps for me to clarify, to have that in mind when we're thinking about wages and then rents, right? Because it's by unit.
Right. According to the 2017 HVS, which reflects household income for 2016, the median income for all households stood at $57,500 in 2016, an 11.2% real or inflation-adjusted increase from 2013. The median income for rental households was $47,200, a 10.9% real increase. Owner-occupied households maintained substantially higher incomes, which in 2016 stood at $87,000, almost double the average income of renters, and 6% higher in real terms from 2013. The 2017 HVS found different income levels among those living in different types of apartments. Rent-controlled tenants earned a median of $28,260 in 2016, a 5.0% real decrease. Tenants living in stabilized buildings earned a median income level of $44,560, including a median of $42,000 for tenants in pre-war buildings and $50,000 in post-war buildings, a real increase of 7.0% for rent-stabilized tenants as a whole, and real increases of 2.4% for tenants in pre-war units and 6.0% for tenants in post-war units. However, tenants in non-regulated units had higher household incomes than rent-regulated tenants at $67,000 in 2016, a real increase of 12.6%. And those living in other regulated units, such as public housing or Mitchell-Lama, earned a median household income of $18,792, a real increase of 0.1%. Looking at rent levels in 2017, the median monthly gross rent, which includes fuel and utilities, for all rental units was $1,450, a real inflation-adjusted increase of 6.2% from 2014.
Sorry, Danielle, do you have the numbers for the income breakdown by borough?
By borough?
Like
For
that
rent
47, yeah, for rent
rent
stabilized
stabilized?
units? Like that $47,200, just in comparison to what like if the average income is 47, what is
Sure.
the average rent, so that we can?
Sure. So you want rent stabilized income by borough and rent?
Yes.
Gross or contract or both? Okay. Sorry, I forgot where I was. Rent-stabilized tenants paid slightly less than a typical rental tenant, with a median gross rent of $1,375, a real increase of 2.6%. Pre-47 rent-stabilized units paid a median of $1,343, and post 46 a median of $1,485, real increases of 2.9% and 2.0% respectively. Rent-controlled tenants paid less than rent-stabilized tenants, a median of $1,039, a real decrease of 1.2% from 2014. While tenants living in private, non-regulated rentals paid $1,830, a real increase of 9.3%. And tenants living in other regulated rentals, such as public housing, paid $649, an inflation-adjusted increase of 5.8% from 2014. The HVS breaks down the distribution of renter-occupied housing by gross rent level. As you can see in this graph, of the 2.1 million rental units in New York City, 6.4% rent for less than $500, 6.3% rent for between $500 and $799, 7.8% of units rent for between $800 and $999, 32.2% for between $1,000 and $1,499, 22.1% rent for between $1,500 and $1,999, and the remaining 25.2% rent for over $2,000 a month. As you can see in this graph, the HVS found vacancy rates varying significantly among different asking rents. As might be expected, apartments renting for the least had the lowest vacancy rates, while those apartments renting at the higher end generally had substantially higher vacancy rates. Apartments with an asking rent of less than $800 a month had a vacancy rate of just 1.2%, while those renting for at least $2,500 had a vacancy rate of 8.7%. Sure.
So that when you say asking rent, how do we get that data? Because
The HVS goes to the owner of the building, and if there's vacant units, they ask them how much they plan to rent the vacant unit for.
And that might not include it has nothing to do with legal rent. It has nothing to do with any repairs that they might be doing and increasing the rent on. It's what the current rent is in that moment.
Well, it's not the current rent because the apartment is vacant. It's the rent that they plan on asking for when they rent it. So it could be the legal rent if they're planning on charging the full legal rent. It could be less. It would theoretically include, the renovations that were done, if they're able to get that. It's more of a measure of the market, really.
I just wonder where those units are, since I do work in the most affordable borough, being the Bronx in the city, and I've never actually I've met rarely a tenant. Normally, it's my grandmother died, and I'm currently paying the $800 and.
Well, this also includes, this is for all apartments, this also includes public housing and other regulated
okay.
units.
This
Which
is not
is partially
solely
why you
rent-stabilized.
see the low vacancy rates, not
Okay.
just because it's a great deal, but because hopefully a NYCHA unit is not staying vacant, hopefully.
Yeah, that answers that question. Thanks.
Another source of rent information comes from the American Community Survey conducted by,
Before you go on, so for the new members, the Housing Vacancy Survey is the only survey that looks specifically to rent stabilized when it comes to income for tenants, and some other categories. So that comes out every 3 years, so the further we get away from that data, we can't get, data that's current for just specifically rent stabilized units. And so the ACS, which is also done by the Census Bureau, does not go down to the rent stabilized level. So everything going forward, you're just going to hear, it includes all rentals. And that's done, and this is done annually, so.
it's done annually. There's also a little bit of a lag. The 2018 data doesn't come out till the fall. So we're looking at 2017 data here. And the survey started in 2005. So that's the earliest that we can go back with any data from this survey.
Is that calendar year 2017?
It's.
Or is that synced to our adjustments? Is it from October, or are we doing any adjustments to it?
No, I'm taking the data as they give it. They do some adjustments if they're interviewing people. I'm not sure how many months out of the year they conduct it, but if they interviewed someone in January, and then someone, say, in July, and they ask them their income, they do adjust it to make it more equivalent. I'm not sure exactly what goes into that, but they do adjust it somehow to make everything equal among the respondents.
I'm just wondering, like, we had 2 rent freezes, 2015, 2016. Are we already seeing the effect on both tenants and landlords in that data? And then are there any significant things that come out as a result? Especially as we like continue to have these conversations of like pushing for us to no increases to moderate increases. And so if there is no adjustment and we are looking at vacancies, we are looking at legal rents, we're looking at preferential rents and all of those kinds of metrics, and like, is it painting a picture that we can already say, like, this is the impact of no increase or really like low increases on the housing stock and people who live in it?
It's harder in this data because it's not rent stabilized, but if you go back to the I&E report, if you track what our rent index is, what we're allowing, and what the the owner is actually collecting, you can see that our guidelines have impacted that. They've gone down, and since we did the rent freeze and lower guidelines, and I think it's on page 6 of the I&E. So I think that may show where our impact is, and then even though it's a higher percentage, so they're getting from preferential MCI, other forms of increases that go into that. That's the difference between those 2 percentages. We only consider vacancy allowances in our rent index, but you can see it has impacted it over, since I think the first rent freeze was 2016, I believe, or 15. You can see that growth has been dampened by us, but it always exceeds our RGB index because there are other increases they can take. But I think our guidelines have had an impact in slowing that increase. And I think that's evidence in that.
Would you make any assessment of like what that impact has been over like the last 10 years or over the last 20 years?
It's actually on page 7, I'm sorry. We go back to 90 was the data that we have.
I'm just thinking about, like, we've had other folks like Tim Collin present data on like what we should do to sort of go back or make adjustments that have an impact to sort of balance out what we view as unjust increases throughout many years. And so has it had an impact to sort of skew that? I'm sure we'll have folks, hopefully, when we have invited testimonies, we'll have folks from the tenant movement address that, but I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on it.
I don't know if I have any thoughts. All I can do is just point sort of to the table and say, look at the rent freeze year of 2015, 2016 period. Our rent index went up 1.6, and that was all due to vacancy because it was, and the 2-year guideline. But you can see it was 4.4% rise in our RPI rents, and then 2015-16, 3.1%, 2016-2017, 3%. And so I think our lower guidelines have had an impact. Even the prior one of the 4.1 was, I think, 1 and 2%. All those guidelines. So I think it's having an impact on rent growth.
The INA also on page 12 says that from 2016 to 2017, again, this is for all apartments, that the nominal increase was in contract rent was 2.3%.
Yeah, so I think there's signs out there that our guidelines have made a difference.
But they're almost at the same rate as all of the housing stock as a whole, correct? So we're like at where all the housing stock, including rent stabilization, is at compared.
Right, because there's other increases that are being thrown in there. But I think that's the evidence I think we can point to and say, yeah, that we may have had some impact.
Another source of rent information comes from the annual American Community Survey conducted by the Census Bureau. Unlike the HVS, which is able to be stratified for rent-stabilized tenants, The ACS provides data for all renters in New York City regardless of regulation status. Looking at monthly contract rent and gross rent from 2005 through 2017 in real 2017 dollars shows that from 2005 to 2017, rent has increased in inflation-adjusted terms by more than $200 a month. The American Community Survey also reports on gross rent-to-income ratios. Looking at these ratios from 2005 through 2017, they have ranged from a low of 29.9% in 2007 to a high of 32.7% in 2014. The ratio was 31.7% in 2017, a 0.2 percentage point decline from the prior year. Looking at ACS household income by quintiles can also provide an insight into how quickly or slowly income in each of the categories is growing over time. While not necessarily true in each individual year, over the time period of 2006 to 2017, the earliest and latest time periods available for analysis, income grew at a faster pace for those in the higher quintiles versus those in the lower quintiles. Looking at the change in income on a year-to-year basis between 2006 and 2017, in real terms, household income fell by an average of 0.2% each year for the lowest quintile and rose by an average of 1.4% annually for the highest quintile. The American Community Survey also reports on renter housing costs as a percentage of income for different income brackets. As household income increases, so does housing affordability. 88.6% of households making less than $20,000 a year have a housing cost-to-income ratio in excess of 30%. But at the upper limit, those households making at least $75,000 a year, the ratio who spend at least 30% of income on housing costs drops to 10.0%.
Danielle, is this adjusted for the Section 8?
No, this is for all renters in New York City. It can't be adjusted in any other way.
But should we interpret, like in the bottom quintile, paying 90%?
I'm actually not sure how the ACS deals with people on Section 8. I'm not sure if they take that into account or not. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find out, but I can try. One of the many prices tracked in the Federal Consumer Price Index is the cost of rental housing, which increased by 2.0% in 2018 in the New York metro area. For comparison, rents in the U.S. as a whole rose 3.6% during 2018. The same 7 cities are compared to New York each year to see how the rise in rents in our metro area compares to other major metro areas nationwide. Of the 7 cities selected for comparison each year, rents in New York City rose at a slower pace than each of these major metropolitan areas, including Philadelphia, San Francisco, Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles. Over the 50-year period of rent stabilization, from 1968 through 2018, overall prices in the New York City metro area rose 658%, while the cost of rental housing rose 819%. In the U.S. as a whole, overall prices rose at roughly the same rate as rental housing, by 622% and 637%, respectively.
I'm sorry, that last figure refers to what, Danielle? That last, in the parens, it's 622 and 637 is?
That's for prices versus rent increases. So you take all the prices.
So the CPI, the general measure of inflation.
The general measure of inflation. So in New York, the general measure of inflation for the last 50 years was 658%. Then if you just separate out rent, it's 819%. So rent is rising at a faster rate than other prices. And then in the U.S., it's about the same. They're rising at about the same rate.
Got it. I understand. Thank you.
Sure. For the 5th consecutive year, a tax credit is in effect for New York City renters, the enhanced real property tax credit for homeowners and renters. The maximum credit is $500, and the maximum household income for those filing is $200,000 a year. The amount of the credit depends on both your income level and the amount of rent you pay annually, with those making less than $100,000 earning the biggest credits and those making more than $150,000 earning the least. For instance, a household with an annual income of $50,000 a year who pays 30% of their income towards rent would be eligible for a $16.31 tax credit. But if the same household were to pay 50% of their income towards rent, their tax credit would be $87.19. But higher income households, those with incomes of at least $100,000 a year, get a smaller tax credit proportionally. For instance, a household making $100,000 a year would need to spend at least 31.7% of their income towards rent before they would be eligible for any type of credit. Over the last 2 decades, the number of recipients of cash assistance, formerly known as public assistance, has dropped significantly, falling 70% since March of 1995, when the city's welfare reform initiative began. During 2018, an average of 356,130 persons were receiving cash assistance, a decrease of 2.8% from a year earlier. Overall, there was a 1.9% decrease in the number of new cash assistance applications during 2018, with denied applications rising by 0.5% and approved applications falling by 3.3%. There was also an increase of 0.9% in cash assistance recipients placed in jobs than in the prior year. And the number of recipients in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps, fell by 3.6% in 2018. This is the 5th consecutive drop in SNAP recipients, although levels are still about double that of the early 2000s. Medicaid enrollment also fell for the 5th consecutive year during 2018 by an average of 7.8%.
Do you have any information about, like, I don't work in this area, so I just wonder, like, what are the requirements to actually qualify for these programs? Like, what are the income levels? Or, like, in order for you to apply for cash assistance, like, what should your income be? What should your expenses be? Just because the numbers seem like they're dropping, and I just want to know, like, are people actually out of that income level, or
Okay.
are barely out? And
Yeah,
so
I can.
What is that
I don't
number?
know it off the top of my head, but I can find out. The orange portion of the graph shows the number of recipients in the Family Assistance Program, and the darker blue shows the number of recipients in the Safety Net Assistance Program. The light blue bars represent the number of recipients who have transferred from the Family Assistance Program to the Safety Net Assistance Program. In 2018, total cash assistance cases fell by 2.8%. During calendar year 2018, the number of homeless in Department of Homeless Services shelters increased for the 10th straight year. Homelessness among all persons was up 0.9% over 2017 levels to an average of 60,028 persons sheltered each night. The average number of families with children sheltered each night decreased 0.9%, and the number of children and families decreased by 1.9%. The number of adult families also fell by 1.2%, but single adult levels were up 9.9%. More families with children were relocated to permanent housing, an increase of 3.0% over 2017 levels. Single adults also saw more permanent housing placements, up 12.7%, but adult family placements decreased by 8.4%. Corresponding to increased shelter censuses, the length of stay in temporary housing increased for all categories, up 16 days for families with children to an average of 443 days, up 19 days for adult families to 570 days, and up 9 days for single adults to 405 days. This chart shows homelessness levels for all individuals during calendar years 1988 through 2018. As you can see, levels increased 0.9% during 2018, the 10th consecutive year of increase. The impact of economic conditions on New York City's renters can also be examined through housing court data. Specifically, housing court actions are reviewed to determine the proportion of tenants who are unable to meet their rental payments. The number of non-payment filings in housing court decreased 4.7% to 91,893 during 2018, the seventh consecutive year of decline. There was also a decrease in the number of non-payment filings that resulted in court appearances, known as calendared cases, which fell 10.5% in 2018. Because the number of court appearances fell at a greater pace than non-payment filings fell, the proportion of filings that resulted in a court appearance fell 3.5 percentage points to 53.6%. And due to the number of evictions falling by a greater rate than calendared cases, a smaller proportion of cases that went to trial resulted in evictions, decreasing from 18.3% in 2017 to 17.7% in 2018. And evictions, regardless of the number of calendared cases, decreased by 13.9% in 2018. As this chart shows, over time, the proportion of filings that are calendared, that is, the proportion of non-payment cases that actually make it before a judge, which is in blue, has been increasing over time, while the proportion of those cases that actually result in an eviction or possession, in orange, has been much more steady. In 2018, the proportion of filings that are calendared fell 3.5 percentage points, and the proportion of calendared cases that resulted in an eviction fell by 0.7 percentage points. In summary, the city's economy increased in 2018 for the ninth consecutive year, rising by an inflation-adjusted 3.0%. Gross city product has increased in all but 2 quarters since the beginning of 2009. And there was an increase in employment levels, up 1.9%, or a gain of 86,600 jobs. The unemployment rate fell to 4.1% citywide during 2018, a decrease of 0.5 percentage points and the lowest level since at least 1976. Real wages increased during calendar year 2017 by 2.5% and rose 3.5% during the most recent 12-month period. There were decreases in the number of cash assistance cases, which fell 2.8%. There was a decrease in non-payment court filings of 4.7%, while calendared cases fell 10.5% and evictions fell 13.9%. And homeless levels rose for the 10th consecutive year, up 0.9%. Thank you, and if you have any further questions.
Do any of the members have questions?
Regarding the evictions, do you know how it relates to the implementation of the right to counsel in housing court? In terms of
The
timing.
mayor is attributing it to that. I can't personally comment on it, but there is definitely a correlation between.
It started, I forget.
2017.
2017?
That's the
And
new,
it's-
the 2.0.
And it's been rolled in with a larger number of
Yeah,
zip
I
codes.
think it started, well, yeah, there was a different version with different income levels before that. So it's been about, I think, 4 years since there's been some version. And I say
no.
in the report.
Not
no?
4 years. The implementation, full implementation would be done by 2021. It's going to take 5 years to roll out. Right now, it's only in 5 zip codes in the Bronx and about 6 zip codes in the other boroughs. And I think that there is a direct correlation between cases filed and people represented now as a result of right to counsel being triggered as soon as you get that first court appearance. And so I don't think that that correlation is a long shot at all. And I think it actually, to talk about vacancies and turnover rate, I think that like it allows us to protect more tenants throughout the city who fall below that 200% poverty line. And we're hoping that that will get actually increased to include people with higher incomes to be protected as well. So hopefully in full implementation, it would have both higher income and all of the zip codes included.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
If everyone just wants to pull out the draft schedule of hearings and meetings, which I can, well, I think that it has a couple of, is it final? I mean, are we good?
Well, final until we talk about it a little bit. So I just wanted to finalize May 1st being our preliminary vote. That date is secured with, at the Great Hall at Cooper Union. And so that's the date that the preliminary will be, May 1st. If there's any tremendous conflicts with that, please let me know. But that's one of the votes everyone needs to attend. The other date of importance is June 25th, which is the final vote. And again, that's at the Great Hall at Cooper Union.
Andrew, just for the new members, could you just explain why it's so important for everyone to be at those two particular meetings?
Yeah, so a preliminary vote for our new members is, we have to set, according to law, we have to set a preliminary guideline so people can have public comment on what the board is going to do. In recent years, I would say for the last 12 years anyway, there's been a range that's been approved at those preliminary votes, a certain percentage range, say 0 to 3% for 1 year, and 1% to 4% for a 2 year. I think that's been roughly what we've done the last couple of years anyway. So that allows the public to actually comment on what the board is doing, and by law we have to do that. So that's the importance of being at the preliminary, and then obviously at the final vote we are making a final decision, so everyone needs to be available for that. You need to be there. There is no proxy voting, so you have to be actually there. So yes. So those are the importance of those two meetings. Not to say that the other meetings aren't important, but we do not take votes at the other meetings. So that's why
We need a quorum at every meeting.
and we need a quorum at every meeting, which is 5 or more at the start of the meeting. But that's never a problem with this board because you guys are great. You're always got full attendance and everything. So, so next week, our next meeting is the 18th. The one after that is the 25th for the new members. That's when we allow the owner members and the tenant members to invite people to come and testify before we vote, for them to sort of solidify their arguments of how they feel that we should vote, or the board should vote.
Andrew, am I right in saying that the April 18th meeting, people should expect to be on the longer side?
Yeah, similar today, I guess. We have our price index of operating costs being presented in the mortgage survey. Hopefully we'll get both those reports to you the Friday before the meeting, so you have a good long time to digest them. I can't promise that because we're still putting together the reports. We'll get at least one before the weekend, and if not, hopefully both. And then we hopefully will have HCR. They're planning on coming, so it'll be a similar meeting as it was today, I think. So we have the room till 1, I believe, but I don't know if we'll go that late or not. And the 25th is an all-day meeting where the schedule's right there, where we hear folks representing apartment tenants in the morning, in the afternoon, apartment owners for a couple hours, and then hotel tenants after that. And sometimes last year we actually got a hotel owner, the first time in many years. So I don't know if somebody will come back. So we have that time slot reserved at the end. So again, that gives the opportunity for the members to hear from both sides of what the arguments are for both parties involved, I guess. In terms of public hearings, those dates, we have those particular venues reserved for those dates. The one that we
Content of our meeting on the 16th. What report will we do on that?
Oh, May 6th, I'm sorry, I skipped over. So May 16th will be the housing supply report.
That's supply. So before we have the
And
preliminary
also the
vote-
changes report.
Yeah, so before we have the preliminary vote, we will have 4 of the 5 reports.
4 of the 6.
4 of the 6.
4 of the 6, yeah.
Which ones will they not have?
We do something called the housing supply report that looks at the overall additions and subtractions and what's been added to the entire supply of housing. It's something, and all these reports derive from the rent stabilization law, what the board needs to consider by law. So we respond to each of these needs by doing a report. Housing supply is one of the issues that report. The one report that that responds to that as well is called the changes in the rent stabilized housing stock, because since all the laws changed in the 90s, there's additions and subtractions from the stabilized stock. So we track that since the law from 1993 going forward, we've tracked those additions and subtractions, at least the ones that have been registered with some government agency, so we can actually track them. So that gives you a snapshot of what's going on. So those two reports will be done after the preliminary vote. And then we have public hearing dates. The one venue that really, the June 18th is the only date available for Jamaica. So that one's written in stone. And St. Francis, we have some little flexibility, but that's about it for the June 11th hearing. They're in the same locations as last year at this point, and that's what we need to know about that. So my intent is to certainly publish the May 1st preliminary vote later this afternoon or tomorrow, so it's out there, and send the email blast around to let people know. And obviously the May 16th, and the public hearings, unless I hear some sort of comment one way or another, we can go forward with that over the next couple of weeks and make those announcements. I would like to speak to perhaps the new, at least Herman, our new public member, before going final with the public hearings, unless he has really any real issues. I'll speak to him next week, I guess, before making them public. I don't, hopefully there's no issues. And then we can go public also with the final vote, which is June 25th, which is most likely after all the commotion in Albany dies down.
They have until the
Perhaps.
15th.
They have till the 15th, but we've had
We've
issues
had-
in the last time there was a
Oh my
law.
God. I think-
You remember we had to
I
postpone our meeting.
literally was on the 25th, and we ended up voting that following Monday, because it
Well,
was
we
like
didn't,
on
we
a
couldn't
Thursday.
vote the following Monday because
Yeah.
the law had not been, sometimes when the law sunsets, usually they extend the law, they never did that. So technically the law was, had sunset and there was no law for 3 or 4 days. That Monday, the fourth day, the last day there was no law, was when we were supposed to vote. So we had to move that out another 3 days because there was no law. But hopefully
They say
at
they'll
the
have
very
it done
least, they'll
before the-
extend the current law, and then we can go forward. If not, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Hopefully, it will not be an issue, but it's 10 days after the 15th, so usually it takes 5 or 6 days after the 15th, so I'm pretty confident that we'll be okay with the 25th.
I'm sorry.
So anyway, so I'll go, if there's no objections, May 1st I'll make public, and the 16th I'll make public, and I'll hold off a little bit on the public hearings until I speak to the public member, but I don't expect any changes, because even if he can't make every single one, I think it should be fine. But I wouldn't mind having a conversation with him first. But other than that, we're good to go.
Any new business from the members?
I actually think it's such a chick to change it, but.
No new business? Any new business or any?
Can you give us one
Yeah,
second?
sure. Take your time. Okay. Do I hear a motion?
If there's anything, please just let us know.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you. Sorry for going over.